Domestic strife and party rage forego. Collect your strength and urge it on the foe. See, Pennsylvania bleeds in every vein. Her house is ravaged and her children slain. Hear her to arms, her parent country call, lest both should perish in one common fall. Rouse, Britons, rouse from sloth and dull delays. Be what you were in Anne's and Edward's days. A bit of a disclaimer before I dive into this. The main source of information I used was a primary source document written by Williamson himself describing his life up to the point of writing, and paying special attention to violent and barbaric acts committed by Native Americans, especially in cases when British subjects were victimized by it. Now, the question we should ask ourselves when looking at any historical document is, why did the author write this? In this case, the clear purpose for writing is to depict the native tribes of the New World as savages and to motivate British people from all British-controlled land to do something about the lawless violence that these people live by. Now, I don't necessarily blame him for writing this piece of propaganda. If a group of people burned down my home, kept me as a slave for 2 months, and made me live outside during the winter with not much clothing for myself, I would also write an entire book about the needless acts of violence they commit, no matter what culture they come from. But all the same, with that in mind, as we're reading, we should be looking out for places where the author might have exaggerated or skewed the truth to strengthen his point. Oh, and if you're squeamish about descriptions of extreme violence, this might not be the video for you. Let's get started. The year is 1738. The place is Aberdeen, Scotland. An 8-year-old boy named Peter Williamson, son of William Williamson, who had previously been living with his parents in the countryside, goes to live with his aunt in the city. Unfortunately, this arrangement didn't last for long. One day, he was down at the docks, and some men lured him into the below decks of their ship where they kept him, along with several other kidnapped children, to be sold in the New World. And just like that, any hope he had of a normal life free from danger and adventure sailed away over the horizon. Well, adventure certainly found them when, instead of landing as they planned to after an 11-week journey, their ship was beached on an island off the coast of Cape May. The kidnappers, realizing they could escape to civilization in a small rowboat but would have to cut their losses and leave their human cargo behind to die in the wilderness, did just that. First impressions of America? Wild. Thankfully to many of us, and to all of them, a ship happened to come along and noticed them. This ship was on its way from Boston and traveling to none other than the city of Philadelphia. In this city, he was sold into indentured servitude for a contract of 7 years. Young Peter's contract was bought, by coincidence, by another Brit named Hugh Wilson. This guy, also by coincidence, was likewise taken while young to the New World, where he built up his life from nothing. Despite being wealthy enough to own indentured servants, Hugh had no children of his own. It was basically the best situation Peter could have hoped to find himself in, given the circumstances. He became like sort of an adopted child to Mr. Wilson. He got easy tasks until he was old enough to handle harder labor, and he even agreed to stay on 1 extra year in exchange for some schooling. He ended up going to school for 5 years. Nice. Hugh Wilson would die in 1747 when Peter was 17 years old. He would leave behind a modest savings of 120 sterling that Peter would inherit. From there, Peter would spend his time traveling around and doing odd jobs for whoever would hire him, until at the age of 24, he married the daughter of a farmer and received a 200-acre farm in Berks County as a dowry. In 1754. Anyone familiar with some of the things going on in Berks County in 1754? It was an October night. Peter's wife was away visiting family. He was sitting alone at home. He hears a knock on his door, and a voice in broken English yells at him to come out of the house. A glance out the window reveals about a dozen Native Americans. Not knowing what to do, Peter grabs a gun and sheepishly opens the door. They instantly grab him and steal the gun. He doesn't resist. He stands helpless and watches as the Indians take what they want from his house and then burn it when they're done. They then give him a heavy load of loot to carry and set off. And so, for the second time in his life, Peter was abducted and taken away from everything he knew. They marched all night. When they stopped, they tied Peter to a tree. They then lit a fire and started to play with burning him. They burned his hands and his feet, and told him to stay quiet and not scream through the whole thing. When he started crying quietly, they told him, "Your face is wet, let me dry it for you," and held the fire close to his face. He writes, "Terrible and shocking to the human nature were the barbarities daily committed by the savages, and not to be paralleled in all the volumes of history." The next night, after some more marching, the group of Indians come to another house. This one had more than one inhabitant. Peter watched as they scalped the 2 parents and 5 of their children. They kept one of the boys alive and made him carry more things, the same job they gave to Peter. The boy, however, was not as brave or as quiet as Peter. He complained a lot, so they scalped him less than 24 hours after they captured him. Peter later finds out that the Indians were selling all these scalps to French soldiers for 15 sterling apiece. Williamson goes on to talk about more houses raided by his captors, particularly notable of which is a house where, he implies this using vague and polite terms, they did things to the body of a dead woman and made her husband watch. They then captured the husband and tortured him for several days while he prayed, before killing him. Also mentioned is a night where his group of Indians met with another group of Indians from the same tribe. While they were together, the prisoners got a chance to exchange stories of the horrors their captors committed. Peter writes that he often wished he had never left the custody of the kidnappers who took him to America. But God enabled me to wait with more than common patience for a deliverance I daily prayed for. Wow, I usually make these videos longer, but we covered a whole lot that episode, so I'm gonna leave it off there. Till next time.